This episode of the Fine Homebuilding podcast is brought to you by Loctite Tight Foam. Say no to inefficient and drafty. Say yes to Loctite Tight Foam. When pros need to seal gaps too small for insulation but big enough to create a draft, they reach for Loctite's Tight Foam. The high-density foam forms a tenacious bond to most common building materials, stays flexible to prevent cracking, and keeps air, moisture, and pests out of the house. Whether you're adding R-value to the rec room or finishing a boring basement, give that space a second chance with Loctite Tight Foam. Visit LoctiteProducts.com for more information. Hey, podcast listeners, be sure to check out Fine Homebuilding's e-learning opportunities. We've created a special discount coupon just for you. Learn about sustainable home building, using mini-split heat pumps, insulation, finished carpentry, and more. See all of what's available at courses.finehomebuilding.com and then use the special code podcast20 for a discount on any class. That's podcast20 in all caps. Thanks for listening.
I had a quick question about the wider hinges. I apologize for my dog freaking out here. There must be a dog walking by. I hope you can still hear me and that my mute has worked properly.
I think he hates the Bonfig wall idea. I don't know.
He's like, don't do it! Don't do it!
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. I'm Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by Fine Homebuilding Editorial Advisor Mike Girton.
Hi, Patrick.
Hi, Mike. Fine Homebuilding Executive Editor Samantha Maver.
Hello.
Fine Homebuilding Senior Producer Jeff Rose.
Hi there.
Please email your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. You can find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. It is a pleasure to see you all this morning in this beautiful fall morning. Thanks for being here.
Hi. It's great to be here.
Oh, my goodness. Mike, we were talking ahead of the show, and I asked you about your new house, and then I stopped you because you had some stuff to share. How's it going?
Oh, like anything, it's, it could be the day before we're going to start construction and I'll still be making adjustments to the plan. It's like any builder is always looking for ways to make things simpler or nicer or meet a need somewhere. And so it's almost like too much information ends up gumming up the work. So we... my wife and I decided to mirror image the whole house.
Oh, so wow. This is kind of late in the game to do that, if I can offer that.
Well, in one regard, it's not, because now at the planning stage is the ideal time to do that, because you don't want to have the excavator there, you dig in the hole, and then all of a sudden decide, oh, no, we want the garage to be on the east side rather than the west side. But it makes more sense for the property. We met with a friend of ours who's an architectural professor at Rhode Island School of Design. And so we've been going over things with her. And it's kind of funny. It almost feels like, in some ways, we're directing her in a way she is not used to, because she's not used to working with, people who are in the
savvy
business, so to speak.
Yeah.
So it made it easier. A lot of things she had done were like redlining her things and saying, oh, no, change this to that. And want to, change the window design. And anyway, we got her to the point now with the floor plan. That's all we've worked on, so that she can now do elevations of the outside, because that's the big unknown with the type of siding we want to use, the Yakasugi horizontal open gap siding. So it'll be nice to see a rendering. We're hoping in the next week or so, a rendering with the windows and the dark colored siding.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'm seeing that open gap siding. That's like a really popular thing right now, right? It's beautiful. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm seeing it everywhere.
Does it worry to you to be cladding your house in something that folks could easily describe as, potential for going out of fashion?
I don't care. Because and here's an example. My aunt had her house built in 1974, and she had this floral yellow wallpaper put in the kitchen and these dark cherry cabinets put in and yellow Formica countertops, and they've gone in and out of style 3 times since 1974. So you just wait a couple years and it'll be back in style. Hey, I'm wearing cargo shorts, which, were in style years ago and then went out of style. So knowing that cargo pants are going to go out of style again in a couple years, I went to the store and I bought like everything on the shelf that fit me. So to carry me through those lean years when they're not making my favorite style of shorts.
That's hilarious.
This is a life hack.
Exactly.
Buy something that just went out of style and wait till it comes back for your house or your body.
Jeff, we were talking ahead of the show about your water heater, of course. You've had it in service about a month. How's it going?
It's going great. It's, like every time I am downstairs in the basement and I hear it running, it's like I'm excited about it. I don't know. It's like it's ridiculous, but I've been tracking the electrical usage, and so far, it's been like 3 weeks or so, and it's like $4.
$4 per week or $4 for the 3 weeks?
For the month, or for the 3 weeks.
Wow.
It's incredible.
And your old oil-fired hot water heater probably used a gallon just to start up before it started priming everything, just to get the flue gas to rise.
At $4 a gallon, yeah.
At $4 a gallon, yeah.
The thing that is most appealing to me about heat pump water heaters, besides their energy savings, is the dehumidification aspect. Can you discern a difference in the basement, Jeff?
Because right now I haven't finished running the condensate line, so it's just running to a bucket. It really does not output that much because it doesn't run that much. It only runs for, 15 minutes a couple times a day. So I got 1 bucket in a week.
Does it make the room colder when it's running?
It's cool, but it's not, it's the basement, so it's kind of hard to, it's an open basement.
So you just got to put it where you don't care about that kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure once the basement gets cooler, I'll care more about it. But, right now the basement's 68 degrees, so.
Yeah, why don't you keep me posted about that? Because I've heard it can be like about 2 degrees cooler, which sounds like nothing, but maybe that's a lot when it's
Yeah, well, we'll see when 64. It gets down to 50, 55.
Yeah.
Samantha, how you been? This has been a while since you've been on the show. It's great to have you here.
I know. Good. I fixed my wall. Did I tell you all?
No.
I don't think I've been on since I fixed it.
And did it give you great satisfaction? Do you look at it daily and think, I'm amazing?
Yes. And I have you know what? I knew this would happen, so I can't say that this was a revelation, but I have a much greater appreciation for the craft of, taping and smoothing out and finishing drywall, because I had a corner of the ceiling to repair, but I tried my hand at a couple of the taped joints just on the flat ceiling that I thought, they had like minor cracks in them after some shifting temperatures. I think that when it was originally done, it was done too quickly. And it was hard to make it look nicer. And frankly, I did not make it look nicer. I was glad that I tried, but I quickly stopped doing that after just trying my hand at it for a minute.
But it is a very challenging thing. It takes a lot of practice.
Yeah. One thing I did do that I wasn't sure if this was a big deal or not was I used the leftover paint from when I had painted this room. It's like a yellow color, and the paint was all rusted around the lid, which I know can happen. But like all the rust just kind of fell into the paint, and I just kind of stirred it up and painted it on because I had a tiny little patch to do. I wasn't doing the whole room, but I was thinking to myself, how bad is this that I'm doing this as it was happening? And remembering a tip that we had published kind of recently to like kind of grease up the edge so that doesn't happen in the future.
Tell me, how does it look? Is it got a different hue? Because it'll turn a little brown.
It looks exactly the same, but
I think it's fine. Yeah.
Then again, the light hits the wall in different spots differently, so I'm not sure I would have noticed if it was the tiniest touch different.
I've done the exact same thing
Okay, I'm in
where
good
I've opened the
company.
lid, the rust falls in, and then I go, oh, the heck with it, I'm just going to use it. And then a couple years later, I was sorry because, yeah, what happened to me, it was in a area which gets humid in the house, and the rust, I guess enough moisture got through the paint, humidity, and then the rust spots bled through, so it speckled with this, red rust.
That's really good to know, because then if that happens, I won't be afraid that there's a new leak. I'll just realize that it was the paint. And if you had told me that that might happen, I would have used the paint anyway, thinking that this is my daughter's room and she will no doubt want to paint it a new color within a couple of years. So
Yeah.
we'll be okay. Or I'll
It
just put a
seems
wall
like
decal on it.
turn her loose with a can of paint and let her
Exactly.
have at it. Yeah.
Exactly. I was never allowed to, not that I asked to do that, but my room was a little bit more wallpapered and pristine. I should just turn her loose on that room. I think that would be fun.
I think one of the greatest things that people and parents can do for young kids is to let them just try stuff. And I've seen the spark that results from that. And it seems so important.
The hardest thing is they want to try everything, and some things are hard to try when you're really
Yeah.
little. Like,
And
she
it can be
did
very
want to paint the
frustrating.
ceiling, and so I did let her. I lifted her up, and she painted a strip, but I had to do the corner.
And I think success is letting them do it, not how it turns out,
I
honestly.
may have a picture of that. I'll share it if I do.
Please.
I can just imagine you holding her up and she's holding the roller and you're walking up and down the room. It's like an extension on your roller handle.
Yeah, at the time, she was kind of light enough.
That would have never worked with Liam because I would have dislocated my shoulders or what
Yeah.
have you.
Yeah, no.
Well, we had a delightful talk last week recording with Mark Rosenbaum, and I think it's a model for future podcasts where we have a knowledgeable guest on the show, talking to Mark about how he's efforts to decarbonize buildings and performance problems that he's diagnosed. It was a fascinating conversation. I hope you all took a listen to that, and if you have thoughts on it, please share them with the podcast email box.
I've spoken to him about that e-learning course, and he's so knowledgeable about all of that. Yeah.
Besides that, Sam, he's funny and entertaining. It's like, there's people who are very knowledgeable about subjects, but presenting to others, it's a snooze fest. But Mark is very, very engaging and entertaining. So I would encourage you all
and
to check
he's down
that out.
to earth. Yeah.
Very.
Yeah,
So
whenever
if you all
I'm at
have suggestions for future expert guests on the podcast, I hope you'll share them with us because I think it'll make the show richer and better. So, not to take anything away from you, Mike.
What are you taking away? He's an expert in some ways that I'm definitely not, and vice versa. So
Yeah.
there's so many different pigeonholes in this industry.
That
It's
is true.
I picked the right field because, I am easily bored, but it's hard to get bored in the home building business because there is always some new challenge or new situation to deal with. Oh, boy. It's wonderful you all writing into the email box with your feedback. I appreciate it greatly. This first feedback comes from Carin in Washington, D.C. Dear Patrick and FHB podcast friends, I'm ready to follow up on the discussion of stair safety in episode 600. I'm in the middle of a whole house remodel driven in large part by the desire to create safe stairs for accessing my finished basement and comfortable access from the yard to the house for aging dogs and people. I did a lot of reading on stair design while planning this remodel, and I even carried a tape measure around and measured the rise and run of stairs I found comfortable when out in public. Do people stop you when you do that? I gotta try this because I think that would be great fun to have folks asking you what you're doing.
I had so many questions when I got to this part. Do you just whip out the measuring tape, bend down? Like, who? Yeah.
You can
I need to
imagine
know.
if you did that in municipal buildings, like the
just
looks
think you
people
work
would give you. Yeah. She says, I have a bungalow with mostly one-level living and fantastic roof overhangs. But when I bought it, the route to the finished basement into the backyard was via a set of stairs, each of which had a different rise, and all of which sloped markedly to one side. I'd already taken a pretty serious fall down them before the remodel got underway. Attached is a picture of my old basset hound climbing those stairs like a ladder. Anyway, my new interior stairs are going to be 7-inch and 11-inch, as in Ian's main stairway. I definitely sacrificed limited interior space to make that staircase possible, but it was the top priority. In order to fit the stairs with the desired proportions into the limited space, we used a split landing. Plans for my remodel are attached with the stairs highlighted in green. The new exterior stairs from the yard to the back porch were not constrained in terms of total run or head clearance, will be 6 and 12 inches. Those are the ones I'll use to haul groceries in. The dogs will use them for all their squirrel chasing trips. The lower rise will be very easy for short dog legs and for aging human knees when carrying a load. My main reason for writing, though, is to share a Canadian study from a few years ago that I thought was very interesting on safe stair design. They found that a longer run was the most important factor in preventing falls. Part of the reason is that a longer run lets you put your whole foot on the tread going down, especially the forefoot where most of your weight is. But the bigger surprise to me from the study is that older people tend to lean forward more while walking and navigating stairs, so their center of gravity is further forward. And in their test, when the stair run was shorter, even younger test subjects shifted more of their upper body weight forward. Thus, it's even more important that stairs be designed with longer tread length to give everyone the best possible chance to catch themselves. Below are some quotes from the study, which is sort of a long read. Thanks for the podcast. I'm an avid listener, even though I'm just a homeowner and not much of a DIYer nowadays. I know the podcast has made me a better customer for the pros I hire. Carin, thanks very much for the kind words and the great email. What do y'all think?
I read the abstract and scanned through it, and I think Carin did a good job of summarizing the important parts. It's that leaning forward as you're going downstairs. As we age, we're leaning forward more so that having a wider, deeper tread depth. And that's not necessarily the tread itself. It's the tread cut on a stringer that gives you that ability to have a nice deep tread so that your foot is fully supported and you're not tending to overshoot your trajectory on your way down and end up stumbling.
This one comes from...
Wait, I have a question. Sorry.
Please.
I immediately thought, where's the threshold where this is no longer true? Because immediately I thought of, and I think this has only happened outdoors in sort of a hardscape scenario, very long tread stairs, which are very awkward to walk down. However, you may be less likely to trip because you have to awkwardly... look where you're watching. I mean, that is one of the main things I've learned from the Know the Code department that Glenn Mathewson writes in the magazine, is that the more you have to focus on the little thing that you're doing, the less likely you are to actually hurt yourself. So you can create these like small changes, like these much longer treads. You might be less likely to trip down, but I could see it being really awkward depending on, the depth of the rise that you're stepping down.
Yeah, agreed. So at the Carnegie Museum in Pittsburgh, the Scaife Gallery, which is the fine art gallery, has treads that must be, 2 feet maybe 28 inches. Impossible to walk on. It just feels like you're going to take a header every time you make a step. All
right, so there is a threshold. I wonder where it is when you're really out of proportion with your length over your height.
Maybe we should try a staircase with all different tread widths and see how it works out.
Well, then you would just fall. That's the idea. The best is the alternating treads. That just looks like a maze.
Oh, boy. This next one comes from our friend Adam in Chittenango. Did I say that right, Jeff?
You did, sir.
Yeah. All right. My first comment is around the brief conversation that was on the podcast a month ago about battery tools and how there was a recent house fire attributed to power tool battery. This made me think about the most expensive part of most of tools are the batteries themselves. I have to wonder if the house fire was caused by someone keeping a battery that really should have been discarded. There's a particular YouTube video I'm thinking of where a professional crew, which shall remain nameless, dropped a major brand drill driver off a roof. The tool was broken in half, with the trigger and handle only held on by the wires running from the handle to the motor. That seems like that would still work to me. The ground guy went to toss the entire tool in the dumpster, and the carpenter on the roof that had dropped it screamed down, "Save the battery, those are expensive." Now, I don't know much about the internals of a modern battery, but I personally would consider one that had fallen hard enough to break the drill in half to be a little better than a time bomb waiting to go off. How many battery problems are caused by abused batteries being kept in service for too long? That's a good point. I don't know what happens if you smack one of those hard enough. He says, my second comment is around the ongoing discussion on LED lighting. In the conversation that kicked off the discussion, there were several comments about how no one wants to pay an electrician to learn how to install new LED lighting. The statement completely misses the benefit of low voltage DC installation. You don't need an electrician to legally install them at all. If you run a low voltage circuit to power the LEDs, you can save all the energy that normally gets consumed by the ballast converting from AC to DC power. While at the same time, you can pay an unlicensed integrator $60 an hour or less instead of an electrician at $120. The real challenge with doing DC installations is that the industry hasn't really settled on a good solution for exactly how to wire an entire house. There are some solutions that use standard internet wiring and use the power over Ethernet PoE standard to run the lights and controllers. Using PoE does give a lot of benefits in the fact that the Ethernet parts are standardized and easy to obtain. Even the big box stores carry the supplies now. But it is also overkill for running something as simple as an LED light. I'm pretty sure it doesn't take all 8 wires in Cat 5 or 6 to deliver the power to the LED. However, I'm not an engineer, and maybe there's a good reason for needing all of that copper. This whole topic is mind-numbingly complex even before you get into the world of photovoltaics and on-site battery storage. Maybe someday we will have 2 distinct systems in every house, the DC side with the batteries, LEDs, computer equipment and PV, and the AC side with the traditional appliances and anything that needs an AC motor. The 2 could be connected by one very big and very smart inverter. On a completely unrelated note, a reunion episode with Patrick, Matt Milham, and Kylie would be truly amazing. Thank you, Adam from Chittenango. Yeah, amazingly complex. That seems to sum it up in my mind. Seems like you all find it complex enough to be stunned into silence here.
Well, one thing to be on the cautious side of, one thing that Adam mentioned was, the hiring an unlicensed
Integrator.
Integrator. Yeah. So I don't know if it's this way in other states, but here in Rhode Island, if it's electric, even low voltage, which is a lot of people consider, less dangerous, we have a special license for that, which is a sort of a step down from being a licensed electrician, but at least is someone who's licensed. So to run speaker wire for an audio system, or to run an alarm system wiring, or to run maybe in this case LED lights that are running on DC, then yeah, they need to have a license to do it. Although a lot of people don't, they just do it, but you need a license to do that. And it might be the same in other places. So I don't know if that increases the cost, but there could be technical problems, technical issues, I guess.
That's the point I've made, is like, why are you using AC power to power every individual transformer to power then in turn an LED? It doesn't make any sense to have all that redundancy to me. I don't know. But it's probably because we haven't figured out how to do it yet collectively.
Well, there's an awful lot of things, as he was mentioning, that you could have an AC side of the house and a DC side of the house. There's an awful lot of things that in a house, like think a refrigerator, which we think of as an AC appliance, but that heat pump in the bottom of that refrigerator could work a lot more efficiently if it was on a DC motor, because then it would be just like our inverter-based HVAC systems with a mini split, that DC can ramp down the voltage going in, that would ramp down the motor much more efficiently than an AC motor can. Instead of an on-off, it would be slowly ramping up as the need for cooling a refrigerator. So maybe we all go to DC for the whole house.
Wow, that's interesting. Thomas Edison is like yelling from his grave, "I told you so!"
Yeah, heck with Tesla and Westinghouse.
This next one comes from Lain. Hey, FHB podcast. I was listening to episode 601. The subject of toilets from the big box store versus the plumbing supply house came up. I heard the same thing. So, who said this? It was
Brian.
Brian's plumber, right, said don't buy a big box toilet get it from the supply house because I've had nothing but trouble with big box toilets. I heard the same thing from a local plumber, and that piece of wisdom was also all over various plumbing forums. Because I'm a naturally suspicious person, buying from the supply warehouse costs more, I decided to do a tiny bit of research. While I can't confirm if the reliability statistics are accurate, I think you'd need a pretty expensive survey to figure that out. I did notice something interesting. When I blew up the diagram of the same SKU toilet, one from the big box store and one direct from the manufacturer, some of the internal parts did indeed look different and had different replacement part numbers. I suspect that means that this phenomenon is real, but is likely dependent on just what had to be done to meet whatever price requirements the big box stores placed on the item. Sincerely, Lain. This is something that has been circulating my life as a construction journalist forever. That folks who are in the trade say that the stuff from their suppliers is better than the stuff you buy from the home center. And if you all have experience with that or have looked inside toilets or other items and determined that the parts are different, I would love to hear from you. Do you all have thoughts on this?
It's a conspiracy. I wish I was surprised.
So this happened to me when I sold building materials at the lumberyard. And, at that time, and I don't know what it costs now, but a tube of silicone, which was commonly used for sealing behind the nailing fin on windows, especially some of the window manufacturers would specify that sealant. It was $6, right? And folks would see what they thought was the same thing at the big box store at $3, and they'd be like, "What are you guys ripping us off? What is this? The same stuff?" And so I would go to the store, and the SKUs were different. The numbers, the UPC code numbers were different, but who the heck knows if the chemistry is the same and they just put it in a different package for the box store? I don't know. It seems like a good topic for our listeners to weigh in on. I hope you will. Y'all ready to get on with the questions?
Yeah, I guess it sounds like if the SKU numbers are different, like there's not, that this is allowable, but it's like, how do you find out?
It's a really complicated issue. And when I interviewed the vice president of Klein Tool, he said that their tools were not any different, no matter what channel you bought them in. But that's only one company. So and he also has a vested interest in saying that, right?
Sure, and I bet certain things would be more expensive to produce multiple versions of, like maybe a power tool.
I do know that big retailers do have criteria for things that they sell, especially on the entry level, right? We need a cordless drill at Christmas time that costs $100 so everyone can get one for dad. Mm-hmm. I'm sure that's true, but is that drill any different than the cheap one you buy at the supply house? I don't know. Our first question comes from Evan Bachwig, who we've interviewed. He's a mold expert in Texas. In episode 598, Mark was talking about painting exterior trim, and I want to direct him to Sashco's product called Exact Color. It's pretty remarkable. You take a syringe of your chosen paint color, add it to the caulking, add a thickening agent, and after a couple minutes, it will be tinted to match and ready to use and match whatever Mark's exterior color. He won't have to go back and paint over the caulking later. Welcome to 2023. People were saying that to me all the time. So, but have you seen this stuff, Mike?
No, I haven't. I've heard of it, but I haven't tried it or
I haven't
seen
tried
it
it either.
How can a little color tint the whole thing? Tell me.
I know.
What a cool idea, though, because
I got to see it in action.
Yeah. Have you done a tools and materials kind of review on this, Patrick? It might be worth checking it out.
Evan, did you hear that?
Let's do a spec.
Yeah,
this is a product you'd put on and leave.
Yeah, I'd like to know if anyone has had in service for a long time, years, and ask how it's held up. So if you have experience with that, I'd love to hear from you. Evan has a question, though, so here we go. Mike, I'm eyeing a property across the cul-de-sac for a rental, and I'm curious what your hard pass items are when you're inspecting a potential rental property. This is such a great question. As a mold inspector, I feel reasonably equipped to see cosmetic damage and know what it'll take to address it. I've got some friends who are going to inspect for foundation issues, and the roof and siding are new as of 2019. Thanks for the help. Regards, Evan Bachwig. So what are your hard passes, Mike?
For the most part, the structure itself, the building, if you have unless you can do it yourself, you're a contractor and can do a pretty thorough inspection. If you're not, then have somebody else do it. But most of those problems can be fixed with, just throwing money at it. The things that are much more difficult to fix are the neighbors. And whether or not there's like toxic waste on site. If it's a Superfund site or there was, somebody had an underground oil tank, those are the things where the sky's the limit, and it's hard to put a quantifiable number on remediating a toxic disaster on a site. So the neighbors.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. How would you know that? How could you possibly know that someone had an old oil tank in the front yard that had been leaking and the soil was contaminated?
Well, I only know for here in Rhode Island because all underground tanks had to be registered. So that would be on the disclosure form with the real estate listing. That has to be listed if there was ever an underground tank.
What if it was put in the early 60s?
It would still have to be listed.
Huh.
Yeah, there was a period of time a number of years ago where any underground tank had to be revealed, I guess, so to speak, and then it had to be taken out. And then if there was any evidence of leaking, that there would have to be remediated. So most all of those, I would think, if they haven't already been done, would be in the process of being done, at least here. That might be different in other states. But again, if you're in a place that doesn't have that kind of state mandated remediation, then you're going to have to figure, if it's pretty much it's going to be oil fired heating system. So if you don't have an oil fire heating system and it's natural gas or propane, chances are you're not going to have that tank underground. But if it is oil fired, then start asking questions.
What about like wells or septic tanks, that type of thing that maybe if you're buying a house for yourself, you're looking at because you know that these could be extra expenses. But as a rental property owner, is that something?
Again, that is something that's just a matter of money. If you need to put in a new well, that's something you say, well, you have a well test done, both for the contaminants that might be in that well water, be they biological or chemical, and then you also have an output or whatever it produces. And as long as those both check out, you're in good shape. If they don't, then you have to put a well in and then find out what that would cost. So and then for a septic system, it's the same thing. Septic system, if you're purchasing a house, at least in my neck of the woods, we have somebody go and do a test. They basically dump a lot of water in to the tank and make sure it's flowing out into the field. And then there should be some record of what that, septic system is. And then again, if it needs to be repaired or replaced, you could get a price to do that.
So basically inspect these items, because if there don't need to be repairs and replacements, maybe it won't be more difficult to manage than it would be if you were on city water or sewer. But if you should have these things inspected because they could end up being those pricey pieces.
And any good home inspector should be checking all of these things on home inspection to determine their viability and condition.
But so it sounds like he might not hire one, depending on what to look for.
And that's one of the, and that's a risk that you take if you're not bringing one in. And I think we talked on a long ago podcast when I was looking at the houses out to buy in Arizona. I hired a local home inspector when I was out there because I didn't know the vernacular building styles and what was underground typically, and just what to look for. It might be, oh gosh, there's polybutylene piping in all the houses built during that period of time, or there was aluminum wiring. So, these are the things that all good home inspector familiar with the homes in the vicinity would automatically look for. So
my list, Evan, is one Mike just mentioned. Aluminum wiring is a huge deal because you're going to end up rewiring your whole house or paying an electrician to do the terminations, which often are even problematic if they're fixed. And the other is termites. and carpenter ants. Because the repairs for insect damage can be very, very complicated and expensive. Anything can be fixed. It's just a matter
Yeah.
of how much money you want to spend on it, right?
And there again, it's, once you discover those things, that could become a negotiation for the price of the house. So maybe you determine there's some termite damage, and then you say, okay, I want a credit back of, $30,000 for repairs or something like that. And then the sellers become aware, and now they know they've got a problem property that they're going to have trouble selling to somebody else. So you might be able to take
Galvanized pipes
advantage
are a
of that.
problem too. If the house is of a vintage, and I'm guessing it's probably from the 30s to the maybe 50s, galvanized pipes.
Can you talk about that? Because Patrick, when I think I've talked about the home inspection that I had and the home that I eventually passed on because the inspection brought up so many issues. One of my experiences was that inspector, who was really thorough, referred me to a lot of specialists. So if there's a way to just go right to that specialist, if you know what you're looking at, like if it's a septic system or something like that, I'd probably recommend that. But that person showed us that the pipes were galvanized as a negative thing, and then that was kind of it. What do you do?
It killed the
all
deal
the
for
pipes?
you. Is that yeah?
Well, that wasn't the only thing, but it was sort of great, there's galvanized pipes. Can no one live here? You telling me they may fail at one point? What do you do? He was just sort of saying that there was nothing to do. So what's the solution there? Just a lot of money to cut out or replace chunks of pipe that
Pretty much.
corrode or something? There you go.
Yeah.
So that was part of what kept me from getting that place.
And that's easier to fix now with PEX tubing versus how it would have been, decades ago. But
Right.
yeah, these are expensive repairs, and I think that's the point. Is anything can be fixed, but it's do you want to spend the money for a rental property right off the bat? Because all of a sudden, your rentals might not cover the cost of these repairs versus if they didn't need to be made.
Right. Well, you may remember that when I then looked at this house, I just remembered all of those things from that house, looked at them, found, there's no galvanized pipes here. They were copper. And so bought the house. No inspection needed.
Oh, really? No inspection needed? Ooh.
I did not do an inspection.
We just wanted a house by that point, right?
We would not have gotten the house with an inspection at that, this was during COVID. So it was already pretty
So the way I look
competitive.
at all of these potential problems that we're pointing out, like galvanized pipe, for instance, that's something as buying a house, knowing that I'm going to rent it out, I'd go, okay, this needs to be fixed. I'm going to be repainting probably anyway, maybe upgrading some floor tiles or what have you in the house. That would be part of my overall anticipated amount of work that I got to get done before renting it out. And I know that in the future, those upgrades are going to increase the value of the property overall. So that's something to think about too, is, even though there are going to be some upfront costs, if you get these houses, the advantage there is you may be buying it at a better price because nobody else wants it. But then when you're done with those upgrades, it's resellable at a higher markup, a higher price in the future.
Our conversation with Mark reminded me yesterday of something. He said when he was trying to buy a new house on Martha's Vineyard, and you can imagine the price of homes is very expensive there, and there's limited inventory. He said he didn't want a house that someone else had worked on, right? Improved, because oftentimes that work doesn't go the whole way if someone's trying to flip a house or someone is trying to get the low bid job for their kitchen remodel or whatever. So he wanted something that had not been worked on so he could make sure that work that needed to be done was done correctly and to his satisfaction. And I thought that was a wonderful point. And I would take that to heart, Evan, too, because those properties are often way less expensive than something that's got a brand new granite countertop kitchen and new cabinets, right? So what a great conversation. And I hope you listening, if you all have thoughts on what Evan should keep an eye out for, I would be grateful, especially if you have familiarity with the Texas market more than we do. Brendan writes, "Hello, FHB crew. I'd love to get your advice on the unvented attic at my new home. I am delighted to return to the, emphasis of the early fine home building, fine roof venting podcast was how it was often described. My partner and I just purchased this 3-unit home in Providence and are living on the first floor, renting out the second floor apartment and doing a light renovation on the third floor. The building got a new roof put on 4 to 5 years ago, and as best I can tell, the entire pitched roof got a layer of OS-based sheathing added on top of the plank sheathing with underlayment and asphalt shingles on top. The attic is currently completely unvented, and the third floor bathroom exhaust fan dumps directly into the attic, which I'm going to rectify before the third floor apartment is again occupied. I'm leaning toward adding wall vents in 2 of the 4 gable walls to provide ventilation in the attic space. I have had several roof and gutter contractors visit the property because the gutters need to be replaced, and each has tried to sell me on a ventilation method or product that involves cutting into or modifying the roof to create eave/soffit vents for ventilation. It's very expensive, mostly because how high the roof is. I'm skeptical of this since I have no idea if there is even a clear path for ventilation from the soffits to attic, because at the eaves, the rafters sit on 4-foot tall knee walls with finished ceilings applied to the rafter. A plus for installing gable vents is that they could easily be removed or blocked in the future if I decide to encapsulate and condition the attic for the sake of installing an air handler up there or a ducted heat pump system for AC. Any advice would be much appreciated. Thanks, Brendan." Mike, can you first describe Brendan's roof? Because I think that's very important to this conversation.
So it sounds like it's a typical 3-family, and being familiar with Providence, because it's 15 minutes away and all over state of Rhode Island and all over New England for that matter, a lot of these 3-family homes. So you got a first floor and a second floor, which are full height walls. But the third floor, the third unit stacked on top, is much like a cape style roof. The balloon frame walls go all the way up beyond the second floor ceiling, so that when you're on the third floor, you essentially have these 4-foot knee walls all the way around. The rafters emanate from there. So you've got these sloped roofs coming from 4 feet off the floor, sloping up to whatever the ceiling height is, 7, 8, 8.5 feet. And then the attic is just the upper, probably third or upper half of the roof slope. So in that compressed area of the rafters, there's not going to be any ventilation air getting through if there's ever been insulation installed in there. It may have been blown in at some point, which is common. So that makes ventilating the roof very difficult on that third floor unit. And so what Brendan's talking about is putting in some gable vents on and he's saying 4 gables. A lot of these are like a cross gable roof. So you got 4 gables on there, and he's putting in the vents. And, what I would say, so that describes it, the way the roof's designed and why there could be a problem with getting continuous ventilation in there. And there's the way the eave overhangs are. Usually they're some sort of a crown molding and cornice molding. So there's really no soffit, so to speak, to put intake vents in. What I would recommend is you may not need to have ventilation up there in that attic. The ventilation is there for primarily one purpose, is that if any moisture vapor is escaping from inside the living space into that attic space, and then you can get mold and if they get condensation on the underside of the roof sheathing, I would just monitor the humidity level up there in that attic space over time. And now with remote sensors, you can put the sensor up in the attic and it goes right to your smartphone, so you can keep an eye on the relative humidity. And if it's staying, in a reasonable range, say, below 50 or 60%, except for an occasional peak, maybe every now and then you're probably not going to have a problem. So there's no need to add ventilation.
Don't mess with it.
So no problem. Yeah, don't. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
I love that answer.
Yeah. It's like a lot of things. But one thing I will point out, and this is unique. I don't know if it's unique to Rhode Island, but because it is in Providence, Brendan, don't do any work on that house without a contractor registration. The way our registration, which is like a contractor license, um, homeowners are allowed to work on their own home without a registration for 1 and 2 family homes. So once you get to a 3 family home or more, 3 or 4 or more units, even if you live in one of the units, you're now in what we call the commercial construction realm rather than residential. And when you're in commercial construction, you have to have a registration in order to do any work on it, aside from painting and wallpapering. But anything else you do on that 3rd unit to improve it, like putting in new kitchen cabinets or doing some drywall work or any insulation work, any wiring, anything like that, you either have to hire a light registered contractor or get a registration yourself. It's, well, I have my thoughts on whether that's an appropriate thing in the state legislation, but that's the rules here.
Write your legislators. Samantha,
Right.
do you have thoughts on this?
Yeah, I asked you what you would say to this right after we got this question. We just published an article that Scott Gibson, who just retired, but worked for so long for Fine Homebuilding and Green Building Advisor as a journalist, and other magazines at Taunton as well, Threads, I believe. He just
Fine
wrote
woodworking? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the Threads one surprised me. Fine woodworking, less of a surprise. But he just wrote an article, "Event for Every Roof," that goes over the code requirements for what the code book calls the net free ventilating area, NFVA, I think is the acronym. And so we went through all the different types of roof vents, and it was, this is what's required. There was some discussion about, builders deciding whether or not ventilation is really successful or whether it does much in different ways, but it is required. And so it was talking about the different types and the pros and cons. And, gable vents are sort of an older holdover that may not do very much. And so retrofitting in a gable vent did not make much sense to me. But I said to Patrick, this seems like the only solution. And he said, I would suggest he doesn't vent at all, which is exactly what you said, Mike. And it led me to realize, this is what's required on new construction, but obviously not what you have to do. And so my only question was, how do you make sure that you're not going to have a problem? And you had that answer, which was, monitor the humidity. And that's the way to find out. And now I want to do the exact same thing in my attic, which has gable vents only.
And
I got a couple points, and I'll let you take it over, Mike. But the reason I said that, Samantha, was because I've talked to folks who do weatherization and energy retrofit work. When you cut ventilation channels into existing buildings, oftentimes the energy consumption goes through the roof, quite literally, because now the stack effect is taking all that conditioned air outside the top of the roof in the heating season. And
Right.
oftentimes houses that didn't have a problem before suddenly have through the nose energy bills. So I would seriously consider leaving
Closing
the thing
my gable
alone.
vents.
Yeah, honestly. And the other thing that I noticed about Brendan's house is it's got a cross gable roof, and people who are knowledgeable about roofing should know that a cross gable roof is a very difficult way to get effective soffit to ridge ventilation because the valley rafters are in the way all the way up to the top of the roof. So I would look elsewhere for your gutter contract, or let them stick to gutters and leave your roof alone.
And Brandon, when after monitoring for a year or so, if you do find there's elevated levels of moisture, write back in and give us your readings, and we can take it up from there.
And if you do have elevated humidity levels up there, check your basement ceiling to make sure that you don't have thermal bypasses that are allowing that moist, cool air or moist air from the basement to get up to the attic, because that's typically where the problem is coming from. So you need
How
to
would you do, like an infrared camera? How would you look at that? Blower door test.
especially if you got some good delta T at like 20, 30 degrees. It'll show up very dramatically. I've seen the IR photography, and it's hard to mistake what's going on. Once again, another really good question, right?
Yeah.
And we're returning to our roots, Fine Roof Venting Podcast. This comes from Julie and John. This question came to you, Mike. I'll read it, but then I'll let you take over.
Okay.
They write, we're in the process of re-windowing and re-siding. With 70% of the drywall removed to reframe the new window size and locations, we went all the way and pulled the rest of the drywall off on the exterior walls. The 1970s fiberglass insulation was poorly installed and riddled with mouse tunnels, along with their droppings and deceased relatives. If that keeps you up at night, it should. We removed all of it and are in the process of air sealing and installing rock wool in the 2x4 16-inch on-center stud cavities. We're planning to do a modified Bonfig wall with 1/2-inch rigid insulation strips over the studs and install the drywall directly over the foam with 1 3/4 or 2-inch screws. We're skipping the furring strips Stephen used in the article. Sam, can you briefly describe the Bonfig wall, which has been a topic of conversation for many podcasts?
No, I was going to ask you to describe it to the listener. I would assume it's adding insulation to the inside on top of the studs. Is it to create a thermal break?
But just little strips,
exterior?
that stop that flow of energy. And it's inexpensive and creates a deeper insulating cavity for some kind of fibrous insulation, right?
Nailed it.
Super smart system. We'll link it on the podcast page so you folks who are unfamiliar can learn more about it. But
and why would you want an inch over a 1/2 inch? This letter writer has explained why they're doing a 1/2 inch, but would the thicker be better? Just a stronger break?
Yes, and the furring strips on top of the foam makes it easier to hang the finished wall material. My experience with if you put drywall over foam, it's difficult to tighten the screws adequately without them popping through the drywall and compromising the strength of the connection.
Is that something to warn this person about?
I was going to, but somehow I got ahead of myself. Anyway,
okay. I'll keep it in mind.
Since the walls are already wired and the exterior doors are remaining, we're trying to figure out how to deal with the extra 1/2 inch of thickness due to the foam strips. We'd prefer not to have to denail all the electrical boxes off the wall and pull them a 1/2 inch out. And though we can install 1/2 inch jam padding around the doors, we realize that the hinges won't allow them to swing fully open 180 degrees without binding on the extension and trim. We're wondering, will this modified version of creating a thermal break work? And do you have any solutions for dealing with the extra thickness? You may be curious why we aren't building out the walls with thicker foam and furring strips, as was shown in the article. Our house is small. It's 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, and about 1,000 square feet, so every interior inch counts. And exterior insulation would have been problematic due to the brick siding below the windowsill level. Thanks for your advice, Julie and John. Boy, this is a great question. So will a 1/2 inch work in this for the problem that we're trying to solve, which is thermal bridging? And I think it would, but Mike, you might have other thoughts.
Yeah, I think it would as well. And I think the more insulation that you put over each stud, like in the article that Stephen Bonfiglioli did back 9 years ago, he put 1 inch of foam, and then he put furring strips over that, and they were over 2x4 studs. So it pretty much equivalated out to be about the extension of making those studs 2x6s, and it was on newish construction.
2x8, I believe. Well, they were in his piece, yeah.
Okay, so it was even deeper. So here, adding the 1/2 inch won't give you as much R value for the overall wall cavity depth, but it would break that thermal bridge of each stud and all of the wall plates. So yeah, it's a good thing. You'll probably notice a bit of comfort, and you'll also probably notice less ghosting of any dust particles or candle soot that might be burned in the house, where the 2x4 studs will be colder in the winter, might get a little micro condensation, and then the soot will settle on there. So you minimize that or eliminate it completely.
Oh.
So to solve the problem of the now you're building that extra half inch, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it's good you're catching the point that now all your electric boxes are going to be recessed a half of an inch. They sell rings, extension rings that work out to be exactly a half of an inch. They're made for when we do tile work, and when we like if the electrician put the boxes flush with like a backsplash for a kitchen, and we go put a tile put a tile backsplash. Now we're building that out about 3/8 of an inch, and we just have the electrician put on these half-inch rings. They also make them other thicknesses, but half inch is most common. So for all of your electric outlets, just find the extension ring that would match the style of box you have, depending on the size, whether it's a 2-gang or a single gang box. And then on the doors, you can put a little extension jam of a half of an inch, and then your trim. And for the hinges, you just replace the hinges with what are called wide throw or deep throw hinges. So I think the typical you ever notice that the butt of a hinge or the pin side sticks into the room a little bit, and that's usually about maybe 5/8 of an
3/8.
inch.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you can get hinges that actually will extend into the room a little bit further, and that changes the rotation point around which the door swings so that it can accommodate that half-inch extension. So what you'd be looking for is a standard hinge. If you've got is say a 3.5 by 3.5, uh, you want it something that's like a 3.5 by 4 or 3.5 by 5, and that 4 or 5 dimension is the dimension of the leaves opened right up, and that way you get the extra deep throw or wide throw.
I think it's important that you recognize you need to fur out these electrical boxes because those are supposed to come almost out to the wall surface. I think they allow you an eighth or a quarter of an inch or whatever, and that's meant to contain arcing or sparks or whatever might happen in there if something were to go wrong and prevent it from catching something adjacent on fire. So that's an important consideration. And
Yeah,
these extended hinges you're talking about, Mike, are commonly used to improve accessibility for folks who want to use a mobility device or what have you. It allows the door to open more fully and get it out of the way so that the opening is wider for a wheelchair or what have you. It's a good question. It's very difficult to put drywall over foam, I will tell you, and it's going to take some, deft driver operation to prevent overdriving them and popping through because it seems to compress the insulation and then the screws just pop right through.
well, this is one case where XPS foam will minimize the amount of drywall pop throughs as opposed to EPS foam because it's a much doesn't compress quite as much as a EPS foam unless you get the higher density EPS. But now we're getting down to the minutia of doing it. But
I hope Julie and John will send us some photos of their remodeled house because I think this is a pretty cool. It's a great opportunity to improve the thermal performance for very little money, right? This is like we're talking dozens of dollars, not even hundreds.
I had a quick question about the wider hinges. I apologize for my dog freaking out here. There must be a dog walking by. I hope you can still hear me and that my mute has worked properly.
I think he hates the Bonfiglioli wall idea. I don't know.
He's like, don't do it. Don't do it. I was looking at these different types of hinges for wider swinging doors after we talked about this question for a minute the other day, Mike. And so these wide hinges, they just look like the same as a regular hinge, but wider. And that's all you have to do to open the door wider and just have a larger gap in that section. Wow, amazing. Because I was really thinking of these more industrial, and Mark was as well, like double hinged wide swing at the top. And that's not what you mean at all. You can just put this right on. Makes sense.
yeah, so for $30 a door, you get some good hinges, or $10 a door, you get some deep throw hinges. The only thing you'll find with most deep throw hinges is they don't have radius corners on them. They have square corners, which if you have a production cut door where they've got radius corners, it'll just mean that you'll have to carve out that mortise out that little tiny corner, top and bottom, on your door and on the jamb. So it's not a big leap to do it.
Well, I want to thank all of our listeners for writing in with your feedback and your questions. It really makes the show what it is. And if you all are All Access members, I hope you'll stay tuned for a very interesting program. Mike turned me on last week to a segment that was on 60 Minutes regarding 3D printed houses and this startup in Texas that's got a development going in these homes as a demonstration project. And the company has plans to be building houses on the moon and Mars in the future. Who knows when that'll happen, but it's something we've talked about on the show. I have my reservations about it, and I can't wait to dive into that. And if you want to see me, my head explode, you'll definitely want to become an All Access member because, yeah, it's interesting.
Patrick, you asked me to watch it in preparation, and it was riveting.
Yeah, right?
Yes.
Riveting in what fashion?
Incredible. I have so many questions, so many comments, positive and negative. Let's get into it.
Good.
Well, unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks to Samantha, Mike, and Jeff for joining me, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Stay safe, everybody. Keep Craft alive. Thanks, Jeff, Mike, Sam. Pleasure talking with y'all.